Welcome in. It's the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips today. So just me here by myself this afternoon, rocking with you from 3 up until 6. Like I said with Tyler earlier, there is a lot to get into today. A busy weekend as it pertains to Gamecock athletics, the hardwood and the diamond. Unfortunately for South Carolina, dropping 2 games against Clemson this week in baseball and getting the home game at Founders rained out. But on the hardwood, South Carolina men's team, Lamont Paris and his bunch getting a huge 82-76 victory over Florida to put them in sole possession of third place and a really good chance to take first place if they are to beat Tennessee in what is a massive matchup on Wednesday. And we've seen some awesome atmospheres at CLA this year. The Kentucky game was fantastic. Obviously with the court storming that happened and the environment around it, but I think we're going to top that pretty easily on Wednesday. When Tennessee coming into town, a win would put them in first place with 1 game to go on the season going into the SEC tournament. And that's something I don't even think the most optimistic of Gamecock fans could have foreseen coming into the season. And that's only a testament to what Lamont's done this year, what these players have done, and the way they've changed the culture. I know that's incredibly cliche, but change the culture, change the attitude, and change, most importantly, the big E word, the expectation of Gamecock men's basketball moving forward to where if you can get some momentum from this season, you likely can be a team that's in the tournament year in and year out. But they got a big win. Dawn's team also got a huge win against Tennessee. It was their closest game of the year at home. It was hard to believe this is the first game this season in which a team played South Carolina at CLA and kept it in single digits by the time the horn sounded. That's a fun stat right there, but South Carolina wins by 8, 76-68 against the Tennessee Lady Vols, who are in trouble, on the verge of missing the NCAA tournament for the first time ever. They could have really used that win, but the Gamecocks did not let them have anything, and they led for most of the way. I think Tennessee maybe led for a handful of minutes, but that was about it. So they go into the SEC tournament 29-0. The SEC women's tournament bracket is set. The women are going to play the winner of Texas A&M and Mississippi State, and that's going to be on Thursday night over in Greenville. And then on Friday at noon, and we'll have that here on the game, we will be broadcasting the first round game and then the games afterwards. So a lot to look forward to with the undefeated Gamecocks, who of course obviously number 1 in the AP poll today. 0 surprise, and they've been number 1 in the AP poll for the entire regular season, with the exception of the first week where they were number 6 and made that jump from 6 to 1. Obviously, if you remember, LSU got beat by Colorado, and then South Carolina went to Paris and absolutely beat the life out of Notre Dame, and then came back here and played a top 15 Maryland team and did the exact same thing to them. And after that week, they have been babysitting the number 1 spot for the entire season. I know that in the last hour with Tyler, we talked about the job that Don's done with this team, and not a lot of teams that dominate the sport year in, year out have their coach be coach of the year multiple seasons. Don was last season with getting a team to go undefeated in the regular season, then go all the way to the Final Four. They eventually fell, and that was their only loss. But to have that 36-1 team and lose every single starter from that team, add in a couple of key freshmen that were going to play big minutes in Malaysia Fulwiley, Tessa Johnson, and getting a big prize transfer from Oregon and Tahina Paopao, and having to get them all together to play like they have and to go undefeated again, with the exception of maybe the LSU game and for a couple minutes the Duke and North Carolina games on the road. With the exception of those games, really not much of a scare. It's pretty remarkable, and that's a good example as to where this program is right now, where they can have such big losses and then just flip the roster around next year, have your bench players who didn't get a ton of playing time end up becoming key contributors the next season, key contributors on a team that runs through the entire year undefeated going into the SEC tournament. I would have to say Don is probably the favorite to win the National Coach of the Year because of that. It is kind of remarkable, and it is a testament just to how good that program, how great that program is in response to everything else. We're going to get into hoops, obviously, throughout the day. It's a lot to celebrate. A big hour here at 3:30. The baseball coach, Mark Kingston, is going to be joining me for his weekly visit. He'll probably have more fun with me than he would with me and Jay, because Jay's going to try to talk him into liking AC/DC, and Mark Kingston doesn't like AC/DC. I'm not going to try to talk Mark into that. But we will talk about the two Clemson games. Is the first one that was rained out going to get made up? I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask him where we're at on that. Going to ask him his thoughts on how his team played this past weekend. Things they can work on, and there's enough to work on. The first game, we take it back to the game at Segra Park, the battle at Bull Street, and there's some good and bad. Eli Jones gave you 4 1/3 innings pitched, struck out 4, didn't walk anything, or didn't walk anybody. You left 12 men on base, and I think that was the biggest key of the first and second game this weekend. You're going to look back on 2 losses against an arch rival where you leave 22 men on base in those 2 games, and you lose both games by a combined 2 runs. That's good. That's a tough pill to swallow. That's a really tough pill to swallow, and that's why I understand a lot of the anger in the fan base, because you felt like you were in those games and you should have won at least one of them. When you leave 22 men on base, it's really hard. It's really hard to be okay with losing a game in which you played really well. You and the number 10 team in the country. Let's take away the whole Palmetto series blinders we have on this. And you played the number 10 team in the country in 2 games, lost 5-4 in both of them, and had ample opportunity to win both of those games. But you left 22 men on base. 12 in the first game, 10 in the second. Granted, Clemson also left about 10 or 11 runners on base in the first game, but they only left 4 on base on Sunday in Clemson. You feel like you had to win. You feel like you had to win at least win one of those, but sometimes baseball's like that. Cole Messina is a really good hitter, and sometimes you just have a bad weekend. And even his bad weekend included a 2-run shot on Sunday to help get the scoring started, but he did go 0 for 6 in the first game with 3 strikeouts. It's a tough showing for him, for a guy who is a really good hitter. Sometimes that's just how baseball is. It can be that way sometimes. It's a large sample size sport, and it wasn't his best weekend, but you still had a lot of production everywhere else. I mean, Dylan Brewer still gave you really good production from the top of the order after batting in the 7 hole for most of this non-conference slate to start. Mark was on when he's on with us last week, tossed around the idea of putting him in the top 3 in the lineup, and he did against Gardner-Webb, and then kept him in the top 3 of the lineup in both Clemson games, and I thought he played really well. You've really got something in that batting order. And then, of course, Ethan Petrie hit 2 home runs in the series, both in the 9th inning of both games. The home run in the first game over at Segra Park, obviously being the home run to tie the game and help send it to extras. That's a tough spot to be in the batter's box at that moment in time. And he came through. And then in the game yesterday, you're down a couple runs. Your team needs a spark. You're in the 9th inning. You're down to your final outs. And he crushes another home run. It almost feels like, if my life's on the line and I needed one person to drive in a run with 2 on and 2 gone, I wouldn't mind having Ethan Petrie at the dish to help knock a run in. That's how good he's been late in games. In these last 2 games, he has been Mr. 9th inning. Unfortunate you can't come away with a win in either of them. But tough losses. I'm not willing to go completely sideways on this team right now. Yes, it's a bummer to lose to your hated rival for 2 straight games, especially in that manner. Losing in a walk-off in your own city against Clemson hurts. That one hurts. Especially, like we said before, the aforementioned 12 men left on base in that game. That one hurts. Especially for Garrett Gainey, who was fantastic in innings 9 through 12, striking out, I believe, 6 batters in 9 through 12. He was electric out of the bullpen. He gave you everything imaginable. 6 strikeouts, no walks, in 3 2/3 innings out of the pen. He only gave up 1 hit. But baseball can be this way sometimes. It was just the hit that ended the game. The solo shot by Andrew Chufo to end the game. And now that guy, speaking of great performances, Andrew Chufo, walk-off home run, had a great defensive game. Was 3 of 6 in that first game too, with 2 runs, including the walk-off to win it. That guy was all over the place and played a really good game on Sunday as well. I think if you had to give out an MVP of those 2 games, I would say Chufo really probably fits that bill. Probably gets that arbitrary MVP award. That guy was awesome for Clemson those last 2 games. But if you're South Carolina, I think there's still cause for positivity. I mentioned Dylan Brewer being reliable at the top of the order. Ethan Petrie having 2 ninth-inning home runs. Like, that feels great. And I think he's still doing a great job of your whole lineup's doing a great job of drawing walks. And some of the question marks that you had coming into the season, I think you got to finally answer with, I don't want to say certainty, because like I've mentioned before with baseball, it is a large sample size game. You can be great one game, be bad the other, but how are you over the course of 40-plus games? I think there's definitely some bright spots in these 2 games that we saw this weekend against Clemson, despite them being losses, that I think Gamecock baseball fans should feel really good about going into the rest of the season, going into SEC play. Some things that we talked about maybe before the season that you might not have felt confident about, especially when it comes to pitching, that you really couldn't get a good sense of where you are in that department based off the teams that you've played. No disrespect to Gardner Webb. No disrespect to Miami of Ohio. No disrespect to the Belmont Bruins. But you really can't tell what you had with your pitching staff in those games because, let's face it, those teams that we mentioned, that's not Georgia, who's leading the country in home runs. That's not LSU, your defending national champion. That's not Florida, who might have one of the best players in all of college baseball in Jack Caglione. That's not a lot of the teams you're going to play in the SEC. This is a conference where you can be the 9th best team in this conference and be one of the 20 best teams in the country. It's hard to see what you have in your rotation and in your bullpen based off of Miami, Ohio, Gardner Webb, and Belmont. But for the first time this year, you played a series against a top 10 team, and I thought on the mound, the results were promising. We'll get into that and more things that I think you can positively take away from the 2 losses to Clemson as the postgame show continues.
played great. We're a good team that played really well tonight. Again, we were one swing, one run short. It's the way the game works sometimes. It's what I told the guys afterwards. You were just part of a great game, and we get to go tomorrow and do it again. So it's all positive. I think you had 2 top 15, maybe 2 top 10 teams going at it today, and look, it was one pitch was the difference. So I'd say it was 2 really good teams. The only thing that we didn't like about today is that we were 1 run short. It was a great day for Gamecock athletics. Basketball team won, a big game. We played our ass off all day today, came up just short, but if you're a Gamecock fan, I think you had a heck of a day today.
That was head coach Mark Kingston after the battle at Bull Street loss, the 5-4 loss in extra innings that ended on a Clemson walk-off home run. I'm Elijah Campbell here on the Postgame Show, riding solo with you. Words, they're hard. Riding with you from 3 until 6. And just a reminder, too, that the Game TV, you can hear me on the radio. You can also watch me on our YouTube page of the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass. And, of course, you can hear us on the Game app as well. Lots to get into today. We'll also be talking with Mark Kingston over at 3:30 here. In the next segment, I'll have Coach Kingston on, and we'll break down the series a little bit and do some evaluation of his team. And he's right. He really hit on what was the theme of the entire series. You're a swing away. You're a swing away with runners in scoring position, away from creating separation and being able to close out these games. It's a gut punch to lose a rivalry game by 1 run, especially in a walk-off. It's a gut punch to lose a rivalry game against a team that's top 10 in the country when you feel like you had them beat, or you feel like you hit well enough to win, and especially when your pitching really came through, when it was maybe one of the question marks that you had coming into the season, or maybe is one of the question marks that maybe kept you from fulfilling your promise last season. They impressed me this weekend, and I actually think that you outpitched Clemson for the totality of both games. We can go ahead and look at your starting pitchers. Pitching was obviously the big question coming into the series, and Eli Jones and Dylan Eskew gave you, I would say, pretty solid outings on the mound. They gave up only 3 earned runs in the 8 combined innings that they pitched. Their strikeout to walk ratio was 8-1. Love that. I think that's reliable. You'd like to see him get maybe a little further into the game? Yeah, absolutely. But it's March. You're figuring a lot of your rotation out. You had a wrench thrown in to your plans because of the rain out on Friday night. It's something I'll have to ask Coach Kingston about as well when he's on with me here in the next segment. How exactly does a rain out in that type of series affect what you do with your rotation? Had to move some things around a little bit. Eli Jones got the start in the first game. Dylan Eskew got the start in the second game. But an 8-1 strikeout to walk ratio, got to have 2 thumbs up for that. Giving up only 3 earned runs in 8 innings, that can win you both those ball games, and it was good enough to win you both of those ball games. And then when it comes to your bullpen gave up 5 earned runs in 11 2/3 innings, but had a 15-4 strikeout to walk ratio. Something I value much in pitchers. I like pitchers who strike guys out and don't walk a lot of dudes. And I think you did a really good job of accomplishing that. You had 23 strikeouts for the weekend, 5 walks in total with your starters and your bullpen. That's a big positive. Now, compared to Clemson starters, they gave up, in 10 innings pitched between the two of them. Their starters made it a little deeper into games. They gave up 4 earned runs. So 1 more earned run than you surrendered with your starting pitching, with maybe a couple more innings that they were able to give you. And they had a 14-4 strikeout to walk ratio. They got more strikeouts, so they certainly walked more batters. And my goodness, in that first game, they definitely plunked a lot more batters. Feel pretty bad for some of the Gamecock hitters in that game, specifically Gavin Costas, who got hit 3 times. 3 times in one game. That man is bruised. That getting hit 3 times in one game is not a lot of fun. But at Segra Park, Clemson's pitchers drilled 5 batters. They walked 4 in all, but they drilled 5 batters. They gave up 9 free bases in that game. And ultimately, I think some of the best pitching that we saw on the weekend came from Garrett Gainey. Yes, he gave up the 1 solo home run that lost the game, but that was the only hit he gave up in 3 2/3 innings, and he was electric. I love the emotion from him. Getting those big outs in the extra innings and the extra frames and getting real animated. He brought a lot of energy. Loved watching him pitch, and it's just unfortunate for him that the one mistake he made, and the first time he got behind in a count the entire game, was when he gave up the home run that lost it. And he's going to get credit. He's going to get, tagged with the loss in that game, but he pitched really, really well. That's another example as to why maybe pitcher wins and losses aren't great stats to evaluate pitchers on. I digress a little bit there, but I think one of the biggest positives you can take away from this series is that your pitching played really well. I think you can rely on your pitching this year. You played a team that's top 10 in the country, who had 4 players with OPSs over 1,000 coming into this series, a team that hits the ball about as well as anybody in the country, and you held them to 5 runs in both games and only surrendered, I would say, only 3 earned runs in the second game. It wasn't the batting explosion that I kind of hypothesized on Saturday when Tyler and I were at Seger Park doing our show talking about the series. I kind of said, if you like a lot of home runs, you like hearing the dinging of the bat, you like seeing the ball fly over the fence, this is a good series to go to. And there were some home runs. Will Tippett hit a good home run in the first game. Ethan Petrie obviously hit the 2 ninth-inning dingers, one that took a game into extras and one that got South Carolina within 1 run in the top of the ninth in Clemson. You got a lot of good hitting. But it wasn't the offensive explosion that I think I was expecting. We talked about earlier in the season, Clemson gave up 18 runs in a game to Kennesaw State. South Carolina gave up a 12 or double-digit run game against Belmont in their only loss leading up to this game. Both pitching staffs can get got on any given day, and in these 2 games, they played, specifically South Carolina's played really, really well. It just ultimately came down to one team left more runners on base, specifically in scoring position, than the other. Clemson only stranded 4 runners in the second game. South Carolina stranded 10. South Carolina stranded 12 runners in the opening game of the series at Seger Park. Clemson only stranded 11 on base. Only 11. That's a lot, but that's still less than what you stranded. And that's ultimately, that situational hitting became the ultimate difference in both games. I know that the reaction on social media was not pleasant, and I would definitely encourage, your more optimistic Gamecock fans to avoid a lot of the negativity on there. I get it. The loss stings. And a rivalry this heated, it can get easy. It can be very easy to get caught up in the emotion of the rivalry, in hating Clemson, in wanting to win so bad that the loss gets you really discouraged for the rest of the season. But it shouldn't be. You played one of the best teams in the country, one of the top 10 best teams in the country per D1 baseball, and you played them to 1 run in each game. For those who believe in the baseball Pythagorean win-loss, taking into account the close games you play, that with the assumption that ultimately you're going to win as many close games as you lose, you just stay in close games against teams like that. You're going to ultimately be able to win a lot of games, specifically in the SEC. I still feel good about their chances of having a really solid season. And even though I would consider myself an optimist as a person, as a whole. I'm definitely an optimist. But I would say it's fair to be optimistic, given that South Carolina at least answered one of the biggest question marks that a lot of people had for them, and at least gave you a small sample size of what they can do. And that is keep you in the game against really, really good baseball teams, which is key because in the SEC play, all you're going to do is play really, really good baseball teams. A lot of top 10 ranked baseball teams. A lot of top 15 ranked baseball teams. Going 0-2 stinks. Get it. Hate it. Especially against your arch rival. But there is some cause for optimism. Coming up next, we're going to have Coach Mark Kingston on. He's going to join me for a little bit to talk about this series and to maybe talk about some of the standouts in those 2 games and what to look forward to as the season continues. You're listening to the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell, rolling with you until 6 o'clock right here on The Game.
And he hits the first pitch well in the gap in right center field, and this will carry on out of here. Ethan Petrie does it again. Opposite field power on the first pitch he sees, a 93-mile-an-hour fastball, and it is a corner pantry home run that makes it a one-run game again here in the ninth.
Our man Derek Scott on the call as Ethan Petrie tied the game up in the ninth inning. Well, actually, that was the home run from yesterday, rather. He did tie the game up in the ninth inning to help send it to extras on Saturday. He had a big weekend this week. 2 ninth-inning home runs, an impressive 2 games for Ethan Petrie. And his coach, Mark Kingston, head baseball coach of the South Carolina Gamecocks, joins us right now for his weekly visit. Coach, appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the positives, no AC/DC questions because Jay is out of office today. So you will not get grilled about your classic rock takes, even though I haven't told you're a big Kiss fan. I can approve.
Yeah, well, we can talk all baseball today. I'm totally fine with that.
He's cool with that. He is a-okay with that. And, Coach, we'll go ahead and start off. You know, the rain out on Friday. Unfortunate that you didn't get the game that was scheduled to be at Founders Park on Friday. First, what's the latest in that? And second, I guess, how does that kind of affected how you had to set lineups and pitching rotations for the rest of the weekend?
Well, first question is we are still working on getting that game rescheduled. We've identified a few dates on our end that we think can work to get them here to play in Founders Park, and so we are sending that upstate to try to match up with dates that they think are agreeable. So that's in the process of being worked through. It was disappointing for us that the game got canceled Friday. We really felt good about the matchups, playing in Founders Park in front of a packed house. So it was very disappointing for all of us when the game got canceled due to the weather. But, you know, it is what it is. You can't control it, so you can't worry about it too much. So we were disappointed, but you know, we'll hopefully get that game rescheduled and get a chance to play them in Founders Park still.
Definitely. Fingers crossed on getting that thing rescheduled and getting another crack at beating those guys because you were so close in these 2 games, and we'll take it to the first one at Seger Park. And before even talking about the results of the game, I just want to ask you about the atmosphere. A large crowd, obviously a sellout crowd on hand at a minor league ballpark at a semi-home game, but a really cool atmosphere for one of the better rivalries in college baseball. What was your kind of experience getting to do these type of games, whether it be here or at Greenville, making that a part of this baseball series every year?
Well, it was a great environment the other day. You had a great ball game. You had 2 top 10 teams going at it. You had a close ball game. You had a lot of drama. You had comebacks. You had walk-offs. You had everything as a baseball fan that you enjoy. Obviously, we fell short, so that was the disappointing part. But to have that kind of support and that kind of environment on a Saturday afternoon in South Carolina, it was a lot of fun and something that I think that our state can be very proud of.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to be able to attend whenever that happens again. Talking about the games themselves, too, I think one thing that I was really looking for with your bunch here in these 2 games that you actually got to play was how's the pitching going to look against a batting lineup like Clemson's? No disrespect to, Miami, Ohio, Belmont, Gardner-Webb, but they're not. None of them are top 10 in the country. Clemson is, and one of the biggest strengths of that team is obviously, as you know, the bats in that order. And I thought your pitching staff played pretty well. But how would you evaluate your starters with Eli and Dylan, and then how your bullpen was able to come in and help you out in some of these games?
I thought our pitching represented themselves very well. And if we pitch like that most weekends, we'll have a chance to win. It's disappointing we didn't score more runs, but our pitching definitely stepped up. I thought Eli did a nice job. SQ did a nice job. Ty Good did a nice job. Gainey obviously was electric. Roman Kimball was very good. Becker made the one mistake. Beach was very good at times. So we pitched very well. That was a concern coming into the season of a lot of people is how would we pitch, but our pitching has been very good. Matt Williams has done a really nice job with this staff so far, and we have good arms. So I think that will continue to improve as the season goes on, and I think that'll be something that'll really help us to be a consistent winning baseball team.
Absolutely. It's a must, especially in the SEC, playing against batting lineups a lot like what you saw with Clemson this weekend. And seeing that on a regular basis is going to be big to be able to have that pitching and keep yourself in games. But you kind of alluded to it, too, when we played a clip from your postgame availability after Saturday that you guys were 1 or 2 swings away from breaking open both games and winning both games. I mean, you lost 2 one-run games over the weekend, and I guess when you look back and seeing 22 runners left on base in both of those games, you kind of have to point to that, I would think, to be the biggest factor in determining W's from L's in those 2.
Yeah, that's the issue. There's no question about it. And we met as a staff at length today to try to figure out ways to help our guys. We know we can hit. We know we're going to have a good offense. It just hasn't hit on all cylinders yet. And so the left on base is a concern. That was the difference in the ball games. I mean, really, just get one more hit in each game, and we come out 2-0 this weekend. So the disappointing part is we went 0-2, but the encouraging thing is it's fixable. I think there's some things we can do to help our hitters, both mentally and physically, that will get them going back in the right direction and be the kind of offense we think they can be. So it was a punch in the gut, no question about it. But if you take the lessons that you need to learn when you get disappointments like this, it can end up being a positive in the long run, and that's how we're going to approach it.
And how do you kind of go about coaching situational hitting? I mean, it's hard. It's a hard thing to recreate. I mean, you can try and practice, by having runners on second and third, saying there's 2 outs and getting in a position like that. But it's so much different when you're at, a sold out Seger Park, or you're on the road at an environment like Clemson and trying to knock home runners in scoring position. How do you kind of go about trying to, correct something that's so situational that's hard to recreate?
Well, it's a matter of making sure mentally they're in the right place. They're not trying to do too much. I think in that series, at times, young athletes try to do a little bit too much because they know how big it is. They know how much attention is on them. They know everything is going to be on the highlights. And so occasionally young athletes will try to do a little bit too much. So mentally, it's the first thing you have to focus on. And then physically, it's just a matter of what is your physical approach? Are you getting too pull happy? Are you the kind of offense and the kind of hitters that can use the whole field? And when we're going really, really well, that's what we're doing. And I think over the last week or so, we may have fallen into a little bit of a trap of guys trying to pull the ball just a little bit too much. And again, that's where we need to step in and help them identify that and then work on it, because to drive in runs, you have to be able to use the whole field. Pull hitters, dead pull hitters generally are easier to pitch to in big situations, so we need to really just continue to focus on using the whole field, being dangerous from foul pole to foul pole, and when we do that, I think you'll see those left on base numbers start to go down.
And then, obviously we focused a little bit on the runners left on base, but Ethan Petrie did a good job, obviously, in the 9th inning, making sure they were not left on base and helped get you into extra innings. He had 2 9th-inning home runs. And, I joked earlier in this hour, Mark, that, if my life was on the line and I have 2 on and 2 gone, I wouldn't be sweating it out too much if I saw Ethan come up to the dish to help save my existence. And he proved how clutch of a hitter he was in these last 2 games. But what does that say about him as a hitter to be able to come up with the game on the line and have that kind of trust in him to be able to make a play and put a ball in play, or in this instance this weekend, put it out of the park?
Well, he's a special hitter. There's no question about it. And to our point, both of his home runs were to right center field. And Cole Messina's home run yesterday was to center field. And we just have to make sure that our guys understand that's where the damage is going to be when things are very important. Good pitchers are just not going to let you pull the ball all day, all weekend. When you're facing a team like we did this weekend or in the SEC, you've got to be able to use the whole field. And even Ethan has fallen into the trap occasionally this year of trying to maybe pull the ball a little bit too much. But when he commits to really driving the ball like that, and that's how he got started last year, is driving the ball the other way, that's when you're going to really see one of the best hitters in the country. And that goes for a few of our guys. And again, it's correctable, it's fixable. It's going to take a combination of coaches and players doing it together, but it's there. We've seen it. As good as our pitching has been so far this year, our hitters had the better of them for a lot of the fall and a lot of the spring. So the pitchers have really stepped up, and I think because of that, our hitters should take confidence that if they can hit our staff the way they did, then we should be able to do better than we have been doing so far, at least as of late, offensively.
And, Coach, one more player I would like to ask you about, too, is Dylan Brewer. Because last week we had you on. Dylan was hitting in the 7 hole in all the games leading up to last Monday, and has a cartoonish batting average. Right now it's sitting at 516, and in the last 2 games you moved him up into the top of the order at the 2 spot, and he hit 500 on the weekend. So what have you seen, I guess, from him that has been consistent to what he's been able to do at the top of the order and being able to help you out just as much no matter where he's at in the lineup?
Yeah, well, he's really evolved as a baseball player. This is his last year in college baseball, and he's really leaving it all on the field. He's worked hard. He's gotten stronger. He's more mature than he's ever been. He just takes really good quality at bats. His on-base percentage is over 600. His batting average is 500. He's just a complete baseball player right now. He's got a couple stolen bases. He's playing really good defense in center field. So because of all those things, we pushed him up in the lineup, wanted to let him start the year kind of comfortable. But now that he's playing so well, I think it's deserved that he goes up towards the top of the lineup. And you may see a couple more tweaks to that lineup just as we're looking to try to spark that thing and get it going again. So, I think you can count on seeing him up there towards the top of the lineup for a while now.
Gamecock baseball coach Mark Kingston's been on with me, Coach. Appreciate your time, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Okay, thank you.
We'll discuss what Coach Kingston had to say and more as the post-game show continues. Got a busy week here on the game. A busy week in Carolina sports as a whole. The women are going to start the SEC tournament this week in Greenville. The men have a potential SEC maybe championship, depending on how your last game against Mississippi State goes. But if you win against Tennessee at CLA on Wednesday night, you're in first place in the SEC with a game to go. And if Tennessee wins, they will clinch at least a share of the conference title. I hate shared titles. Little aside here. I think that's one of the worst things in college basketball. They get a lot of things right in college basketball. I don't like the shared titles. If you're the one seed in your conference tournament because of the tiebreakers, you are the conference regular season champion. I cannot be convinced otherwise, but alas, they share titles. So Tennessee can clinch a share of the SEC regular season title if they win and avenge their loss from earlier at CLA. And then, of course, baseball this week, too. They're going to play the Citadel, and tomorrow on these airwaves, Carolina Calls with Coach Lamont Paris, 6 p.m. on WNKT. And then while that's happening, a 6:15 pregame for a 6:30 first pitch between the Gamecocks baseball with Coach Mark Kingston, as you heard in the last segment, against the Citadel. 6:15 pregame, 6:30 first pitch on WISW, 1300 AM. So exciting stuff. A whole lot going on these airwaves as well. So stick with us for all the latest Gamecock live baseball and basketball action. I want to revisit some things that Coach Kingston said earlier. You can always go back and listen to the interview on the Game TV on our YouTube page, brought to you by Shepherd's Glass, or you can download the Game Nashville app or go to 1075thegame.com. This will be posted, once the hour is over, so you can go back and listen to my conversation with Coach Kingston. And I had to address, I guess, maybe the elephant in the room when it comes to this series against Clemson. 22 runners left on base in 2 games, a pair of 5-4 losses. And ultimately, with a lot of other things being even, that's the one thing that turned your W's into L's in this series this week. And I thought his answer was pretty interesting. One thing is, maybe guys trying to do too much. Maybe, with all the emotion that goes into a rivalry like you have with an in-state foe in a ballpark like Segra, a beautiful minor league ballpark that was packed to the brim with both Carolina and Clemson fans, that maybe the natural human inclination is to try to do too much in that scenario, to want to be the hero instead of maybe methodically playing out a pitch count or being more patient with your at-bats. That I could perfectly see, and I can maybe hypothesize to myself. But one thing that he said I thought to be pretty interesting was he mentioned that guys getting a little maybe too pull happy, trying to pull the ball right-handers, to left field or left-handers to right field. And he had a really good example of the home run that Ethan Petrie hit to tie the game in the top of the 9th at Segra was one where he hit opposite field. He wants his guys to be able to hit the ball at the opposite field and to be able to maybe not try to rely on pulling the ball to one side of the field or the other. You got to be able to hit it all parts of the field and hit it where they ain't, to use an old baseball saying. So I found that to be pretty interesting. And one other thing, too, he was thrilled with the pitching, and I think you should be. I talked about it earlier in the segment that if you want to take away silver linings from 2 heartbreaking losses, you can accurately take away that your pitching might be in good shape to take you through the SEC slate. Mark said that if they got the pitching performances like they did in those 2 games against number 10 Clemson, he likes their chances in having a really good run in the SEC. And quite frankly, I do too. You can get an 8-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio against a team like the Tigers in those 2 games. You're able to limit the earned runs and make your dynamic offense only have to score more than 4 runs to win games. I like your chances of being a really good team, potentially a contender in the world's toughest college baseball conference. So some positive things there, and I think Mark kind of alluded to a lot of that in terms of the pitching playing really well. Had to adjust the rotation a little bit because of the rain out. And, of course, one of the biggest takeaways, too, I guess maybe some news from that interview, is that he did confirm that they are still actively scheduling a makeup game for the rain out that was at Founders on Friday. That game got rained out. So they're sending some dates to Clemson, and maybe they can get something worked out. I'm really hoping they do. Yes, you've already technically, I guess, lost the series, but I think Founders Park and everybody here deserves to have at least a game against the Tigers here. And who knows? You get them in late April, in the middle of the week, and you're able to get a win. That could propel you, and that could mean a whole lot in the middle of a very competitive and tight conference schedule. We'll get to the hoop side of it in the next hour. Jack Velcher from Gamecock Central at 4:30, breaking down the wins against Florida for the men and Tennessee for the women. The postgame show will be right back.
82-76. Gators inbound. Kugel lets a three go, and you can put Spurs on this one. Michi Johnson meets Lamont Paris at midcourt with a huddle and a hug, and the Gamecocks defeat the Gators 82-76. 24 wins in 2024. Can you believe it?
Yes, I can. And what a great game by Meach. He scored how many in the second half? 21 points in the second half.
Derek Scott and Judge Manning on the call for, you heard it, an 82-76 win over Florida. That was the first time since 2017 that a ranked Gamecocks team played a ranked opponent at CLA. Ironically enough, that game, I got that one from Derek Scott, that was also against the Florida Gators, and South Carolina comes out in victorious fashion in what was a thrilling basketball game. And it was one that, going into, I felt like Florida had an advantage because of the size they have. They're the 10th biggest team in the country. In the 5 previous games leading up to it, they would play 2 of their players that were 6'11" or taller, and over 50% of their possessions, 2 at the same time. They possess size that teams in the SEC don't really have. A lot of, especially South Carolina. This was not a good matchup for B.J. Mack. He struggled a little bit, wasn't his best game, 1 of 7 from the field, but he still was able to dish out 3 assists. This team is big, and Florida also loves to play up tempo. The magic possession number per KenPom, South Carolina, and games in which there's 63 possessions or less are 10-0 in those games. So if the game is played at a snail's pace and you get 63 or fewer possessions, South Carolina does not lose. Florida, on the other hand, straight up doesn't play those games. Out of all the games this year, they have a whopping 0 games in which they're played at 63 possessions or fewer. So something had to give. One team plays really fast. One team plays really slow. One team plays really large lineups, and one team can go small and beat you in a variety of different ways. And I think this win shows that this South Carolina team has some versatility that doesn't make them matchup proof. I don't want to say that they're completely matchup proof, but in a game in which I and a lot of other people that I know thought that Florida would be a tough out because of how they play and the personnel they deploy, South Carolina was able to make the adequate adjustments to win the game, and clearly it wasn't easy. Clearly keeping Walter Clayton from shooting the lights out of CLA wasn't easy. He was 6 of 11 from 3, and him and Zion Pullen did a good job of at least keeping the Gators in the game and helping them get a lead early on in the second half. Early in the second half, they had a 10-point lead. They were up 56-46. Late in the second half, South Carolina kept chipping away, and they ultimately, with 11 minutes to go in the game, down 58-52, they deploy a 1-3-1 zone. Now, it's something that Coach Paris said they had in their pocket to use if they needed to, but with Florida being able to get a lot of what they wanted and scoring at a high rate against South Carolina's man-to-man defense, Coach Lamont Paris thought it was maybe time to make a little bit of a change on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it did. I thought at one point we started making some baskets with at least some regularity, but then we were struggling getting stops. They were doing a good job in the ball screens. They were scoring a variety of ways in the ball screen. Sometimes with the guy that had the ball, they were pretty effective from the mid-range even during that. So I just wanted to change the complexion of what they were doing. And instead of being so geared up to ball screens and handoffs, essentially the same type action, even more difficult sometimes to defend, and make them do something different, particularly when they had 2 bigs in that don't shoot the ball great. So now you only have 3 guys to keep an eye on while you're out in the zone. And so, obviously, we did a good job. We got some tremendous results with it, and it's the second time the old 1-3-1 has saved the day for the Gamecock.
That's right. The first time being the game at Georgia, where Georgia was shooting the lights out at Stegman, and they made a little bit of adjustment going to that 1-3-1, and Georgia's ball movement basically ceased to exist after that adjustment. And Florida had similar issues with the 1-3-1. I thought Zach Davis did a fantastic job at the top of the 1-3-1, being able to get deflections, being able to make Florida have to throw the ball over him, and making life hard. Here was Zach Davis's thoughts on the 1-3-1 when he was asked about his role in it and what he thought made life more difficult for Florida.
Just be aggressive, impact the ball at the top, just being long, just being active hands, active feet, making the passes hard for the offense. But I feel like everybody did what they had to do, and we caused havoc for them.
Causing havoc and making passes hard. I think those are the two key terms that Zach used that I completely agree with in terms of how that changed the game. They got a lot more deflections. They made Florida move the ball from side to side instead of being able to get into a lot of their pick and roll and a lot of their zoom actions. We go back to the LSU loss a few weeks ago. Lamont, after the game, said that LSU's zoom action gave them a ton of trouble, and it did. LSU has very athletic guards who have decent size. They use that dribble handoff action. They use the zoom to be able to get their players downhill and to get them to the basket to either draw a foul or to be able to get easy buckets or maybe even get lobs to their rolling big men. And Florida was able to do that in the first half. Tyrese Samuel caught a lob for a dunk. Thomas Huff caught a lob for a dunk on the pick and roll and the ball screens. Walter Clayton Jr., if you didn't cheat up and stop him from getting that ball, he was going to let it fly from three. And again, he hit 6 of them. You can't play too far away from him on the ball screen. So when going back to what Lamont said and then combine it with what Zach said when talking about the change to the 1-3-1, they noticed that Florida was getting into something that was really hard to stop, that they weren't going to do with a ton of effectiveness. Florida in the first half was at about 1.23 points per possession. They did a whole lot of the effective ball screens, the effective zoom actions, the things that were able to create either lobs or pull-ups from Zion Pullen, who is a really good mid-range shooter, and be able to free things up for their guards. But in the second half, Florida still was able to get over 1.18 points per possession, but a lot of that came late, and a lot of that came without the assistance of the 1-3-1. I was charting it when I was at the game, and the first, I believe, 9 possessions in that 1-3-1, Florida only generated 5 points and turned the ball over 4 times, got 0 offensive rebounds, and went 1 of 4 from 3. And for context, that three-pointer that was hit against the 1-3-1 was from Zion Pullen with less than a second left on the shot clock with Zach Davis's hand in his face. You can live with giving up that 3 points because Florida had to earn it and had to use every second of the shot clock to earn it. That was a big play in the game. It kept Florida in it, but then even watching him hit that shot, I thought, wow, that wasn't easy. Florida's going to have to hit really tough jumpers if they want to escape this place right now. And they didn't hit enough to ultimately win the game, and going to that 1-3-1 seemed to be the biggest difference. The other 2 points they scored on those 9 possessions came from a Tyrese Samuel floater. And talking with Lamont after the game, he mentioned, if that's the shot that you're going to get, if that's your easiest look you're going to get against this defense, gonna roll with that all day. And I agree. If a center attempting a 12-foot floater contested is the easiest look Florida's getting against that defense, you're doing a pretty good job. And Todd Golden afterwards mentioned that when South Carolina went to the zone, they had trouble because it slowed them down. I'll go ahead and allude to something mentioned earlier. Florida plays a really fast pace, the number 70 adjusted tempo team in college basketball. They love moving quickly. They love shooting early in the shot clock. They love to let their guards be dynamic. They love to get into those zoom actions and pick and rolls and do what they did in the first half. They had to slow down and think more. That's another word that Todd Golden used after the game when asked about South Carolina's zone and how that impacted them. They had to think more. They had to almost overanalyze. There might have been some, paralysis by analysis on the floor because a 1-3-1 is so dramatically different than what South Carolina was playing earlier in the game. Maybe they weren't as prepared for it, and maybe South Carolina played that defense really well. I think it's the latter more than the former. They even tried to adjust. They tried to put Tyrese Samuel in the middle of it, and it didn't do him much good. Got him the one floater, but other than that, Colin Murray-Boyles did a really good job of clogging the middle, making sure that they weren't going to be able to have straight line drives to the basket. And instead of being able to control the ball from the middle of the floor, the 1-3-1 made Florida basically play ping pong from one side of the perimeter to the other And ultimately, it wasted enough time where they had to shoot a very uncomfortable shot more often than not late in the shot clock. Now, to Florida's credit, Walter Clayton Jr. did a lot of that. He had a lot of those shots. I know Rick Pitino really wishes he could have followed him from Iona to St. John's, but he didn't, and he went to Florida, and he's doing a really good job of getting Florida into the NCAA tournament. But that defensive adjustment is one microcosm of what makes this team really good, what makes them defy the odds, defy the KenPom numbers, defy the net rating. I know people are upset that South Carolina barely moved in the net rating after a win, and I totally get the frustration. The net can be a weird thing, but also a reminder, it's a sorting tool, not a power ranking. It's very computer-based, but it is a sorting tool to evaluate wins. Don't want to get too much into the net because I confuse myself talking about the net sometimes. But if we just look at this game against Florida, South Carolina had to play a style that was a little more uncomfortable to them. KenPom estimated that there were 67 possessions played in this game. Very few games have South Carolina played where there are that many possessions. There haven't been many games in which South Carolina had a scoring output as high as they did in this game. A lot of the games they win are under 80 points. And looking at it right now, the last time they won a game by having to score more than 80 points was when they beat Florida A&M on December 30th, 94-62. You look at the rest of the games. George Washington, they scored 89 points in that win, but they also broke a school record for three-pointers made in a game. And the only other time after those two games in which they scored more than 80 points in a win was the opener against USC Upstate. So even though the book on South Carolina is out that they play slow, they really drag the possessions long, and they haven't been winning games in the 80s, 90s. This isn't Alabama. This is not Kentucky. This is not how they win basketball games. But they were forced to have to do that. Florida made you score more than 76. And they were forced to play a style that might have been a little different than what they would have preferred, and they still won anyway. They won anyway, and did so without one of their best three-point shooters in Miles Studi, who's still missing some time with the sprained knee. This win is just a microcosm of exactly the season that South Carolina is having right now. South Carolina beat the EBPI. I will admit, I thought Florida had the advantage. I thought their style of play would give South Carolina trouble. I thought the size would give South Carolina trouble. And that maybe if South Carolina had to play a little bit more up-tempo, that might favor Florida. In theory, it would. In practice, it did not. I have more notes and thoughts on this game. On the other side, we keep our focus on the men's basketball team right now, 82-76 win over Florida. And while the 1-3-1 changed a lot of things, there's a trend with South Carolina basketball that might be the most impressive trend I have seen with them all season long, and that's going to bode well for them in tournament play. I'll tell you what that is as the postgame show continues. Yes, South Carolina's defense is really good. Yes, the tempo is Wisconsin-like. It is Virginia-like. And yes, they have established an identity that I think is going to bode well for them in the NCAA tournament and the SEC tournament. But the one thing that I don't think is being discussed enough about this team, and I'm guilty of this, is how good they've been on the glass. Their last 2 games, the South Carolina Gamecocks have played the number 1 offensive rebounding team in the country in Texas A&M and out-rebounded them for the entire game, offensively and defensively, had a better offensive rebounding percentage than the number 1 offensive rebounding team in the country. And then when they beat Florida on Saturday, they beat the number 3 offensive rebounding team in the country. A&M's grabbing well over 41% of their missed shots. Florida on the season is grabbing well over 39% of their missed shots. 2 of the 3 best offensive rebounding teams in the country you have beaten. Out-rebounded A&M, got close to out-rebounding Florida, but you didn't. But in that second half, where you had to erase a 10-point deficit and you had to take away some of Florida's strengths, you did so on the glass. Because while Florida did, yes, ultimately grab 9 offensive rebounds for the game, it's well below their season average, and percentage-wise, it's definitely below their season average. They grabbed 1 singular offensive rebound in the second half. The Gamecocks held the number 3 offensive rebounding team in the country by percentage to a single offensive board in the second half. Can't say rebounds in the second half. Rebound. They had 1 offensive board in that half. Florida could not create second chances, and that's one of the biggest pluses that their offense has. I mentioned the size. They're the 10th tallest team in the country if you take average height according to KenPom of their players. But you kept them off the glass for an entire half. That might be as impressive as changing to a 1-3-1 and changing the complete trajectory of the game. This is something that makes you closer to matchup proof, because when we get into bracket season, which we are very well in right now here in March, in these single game elimination settings, sometimes teams that we think can go all the way and make serious runs fall a wee bit short because they lose on the glass. Or they play a team that's a good offensive rebounding team, and while you might be a good defensive team that makes teams shoot tough shots, if you get bullied on the glass, the other team's going to generate easy looks from around 3 or 4 feet solely because they missed a jumper. Houston has done a really good job of that the last few years. When Houston went to the Final Four a few years ago, they weren't particularly a great 3-point shooting team or even a 2-point shooting team, but they're the best offensive rebounding team in the country by a country mile too. And they took that all the way to the Final Four. They didn't have to be a good shooting team. They played some teams that, while they're against a good defensive opponent, they couldn't keep Houston off the glass. So even if Houston shot 15 to 20% from 30, it didn't matter. Houston took that to a Final Four. But South Carolina can negate teams like that. South Carolina can get in a game with elite offensive rebounding teams and completely take that away from them. It's an element that makes them a little more matchup proof. And it's an element that gives me more confidence that not only are we going to see them at the good seed in the NCAA tournament, that's something that can get you to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Obviously, don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think you're seeing something really impressive with this Gamecock team in terms of how they keep great offensive rebounding teams off the glass. South Carolina's played 3 top 20 teams per KenPom in offensive rebound percentage. I told you the first 2, which were the number 1 and number 3 teams in the country in offensive rebounding, and they also played Mississippi State in their conference opener. Mississippi State, the number 20 offensive rebounding team in the country, and when you played the Bulldogs, you held them to only a 28.6% offensive rebound rate, which for context, they're grabbing 35.5% of their missed shots, 7-point difference in rebounds. You held them to a small number, and for a team that doesn't shoot very well like Mississippi State, that made a huge difference in the game. And as a matter of fact, you almost had double the amount of offensive rebounds that Mississippi State had. You were 3-0 against teams that are top 20 in the country in offensive board percentage. It's impressive. And one of the players that's the biggest plus in terms of keeping the opponent off the glass is Colin Murray Boyles. Now, Colin Murray-Boyles wasn't the leading scorer. That was Meechie Johnson, who had an incredible game. Haven't even gotten to mention him yet, but 25 points on 10 of 15 shooting, and including the 3 at the end in front of Will Richard, who, after, Meechie caught the ball, sized him up a little bit and hit a three-pointer in his grill to take the lead for good with about 45 seconds left. That play is going to get a lot of attention, and Meechie's play is getting a lot of attention, as it should, and that's why he's the SEC Player of the Week and the National Player of the Week in college basketball. But they don't win that game Saturday if it isn't for Colin Murray-Boyles. Colin scored a lot better than he did against Texas A&M, and it helps that he didn't foul out, of course, but he scored 15 points, made 9 of his 10 free throw attempts. Don't want to bury that lead there, but made 9 of his 10 free throw attempts, 15 points, and grabbed 11 rebounds, 2 on the offensive glass and 9 on the defensive glass. That makes a huge difference when it comes to negating a team like Florida and the advantage that they would have had on you on paper coming into the game, which is size and offensive rebounding. And Colin Murray-Boyles made a really good effort to make sure that there was not a player in a blue uniform creating a second chance for the other team. And I don't know if he could have gotten a better compliment from a teammate than he did with Meechie Johnson after the game. Meechie was asked about the play of Colin Murray-Boyles, and here's Meechie's response.
Colin is not a freshman. That is a man-child. That's a man-child. But he's very physical, and he really believes in himself. He's made a huge jump, missing some games early in the year. And for him to be in this position where he's at, impacting offense and defense, he's just a very smart freshman, man. His future is very bright, and we trust him out on the court. Like, I'd be forgetting that he's a freshman out there sometimes, just the way he's built. When he's out there encouraging guys, hey, pick your head up. It's more than just basketball with these guys, man. Everybody out there, we really hold each other to a standard, and we push each other to be better. And that's Gamecock basketball. Last one, name.
It is Gamecock basketball. Colin Murray-Boyles, even as a freshman, helping his team, full of veteran leadership, win big-time games, doing so on the glass. And you heard Meechie. He's not a freshman. He is a man-child, and that is accurate in terms of his stature and his athletic ability and the way that he presents himself on the floor as well. A nice caveat in there as well is, Meechie talking about his demeanor on the floor. On a team full of seniors and really experienced players, Colin's out there telling guys to keep their head up, keeping guys engaged. You see him talking a lot on the floor as well. It's something I admire about him. He doesn't play like a freshman. Buzz Williams last week, in preparation for South Carolina and his media availability, called Colin the Freshman of the Year in the SEC. I don't know if he's going to win that distinction, but I think he's very well worthy of being in the conversation with your Reed Shepherds, your Rob Dillinghams, and a lot of other players that are going to make a run for the SEC Freshman of the Year. And you can maybe make an argument that his impact when he got into the starting lineup took South Carolina from good to really good, from good to you need to take us seriously. That maybe Colin's insertion into the starting lineup early in the season took South Carolina from a good SEC team to, with 2 games left in the SEC slate, you have a chance to win the damn thing type good. And a lot of that comes from South Carolina not getting beat on the boards, even though they play teams who are elite in that trait. Something to watch for the rest of the season, too, because Tennessee's a really good offensive rebounding team. Not top 20, but they excel at it, and they're coming in here for your biggest game of the season, a game that could potentially put you in first place in the SEC come Saturday, going into your final game of the season. And when you look at the game, look at the matchup on paper, and you see that Tennessee is a top 70 offensive rebounding team, that's not something that is going to keep you out of the game because you've already played the best in the country at that trait, and you have made sure that that did not beat you in any of those games. The aforementioned Mississippi State Bulldogs that you're going to play on Saturday on the road in a tough environment, that's one of the 20 best offensive rebounding teams in the country, and you've proven you can keep them off the boards and almost double their rebounding output. When you look at matchups in March, and you see a team that's rebounding the ball really well on offense and defense, you can almost guarantee that South Carolina is not going to get beaten by that part of the game, and that's important when it comes to looking at matchups. My man Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central, he was at the game on Saturday at Colonial Life Arena, and he also has done a really good job of covering the baseball team. He's got some thoughts on the baseball losses to Clemson. He's got a lot of thoughts on the win over Florida at CLA on Saturday. We'll talk to Jack as the postgame show. Whoa, I pulled a Jay Phillips. As the postgame show continues. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways this Monday afternoon. We'll start off in Irmo. An accident been reported on Bickley Road at Broad River Road, causing some traffic backup over there in Irmo. Keeping it in Richland County here, an accident on Highway 1 near Augusta Road at Sparkleberry Lane is causing some traffic backup, as well as another one in Richland County on I-77 southbound right before the Two Notch Road exit exit 17. One more here at Percival Road near Highway 12 at I-77. And lastly, we got one in Lexington. An accident recently been reported at Pisgah Church Road over at US 1. Post-game show rolling along, and this time with a guest. My man Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central joins me now to talk about all the fun we had here in Columbia this past weekend with the basketball team grabbing some wins, the baseball team having some very tight, unfortunate losses, but entertaining baseball nonetheless. Jack, appreciate you joining me right now, man, and have you been able to catch your breath a little bit from your busy day on Saturday? I know you were all over the place.
Oh, I got back yesterday, and I got back about 9 o'clock, went to bed, and then just took a quick little power nap here after what has been another busy day of writing stories and catching up and stuff. And I got to be back on 107.5 The Game for the second time today, so I'm honored to be back on. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say power nap, I cannot. I'm not one that can take a power nap. If I am taking a nap, I'm out for at least an hour. I can't do short naps. I'm too heavy of a sleeper.
Let's say I was dozed off sleeping for like 15 minutes, and then I was tossing and turning and just laying down, closing my eyes for the next 20. So nothing crazy. So I feel you on that.
Nice, short, compact, a lot more efficient than what I can handle on that side. And speaking of efficient, we'll go ahead and take it to the men's basketball team. They had one of their more efficient offensive outputs in the game against Florida in the thrilling 82-76 win against Florida, deleting a 10-point deficit in the second half. And overall on offense, going about 1.2 points per possession and winning a game in the 80s. This is not something that we have seen South Carolina do frequently this year. In the last segment, I went through the games in which they have won by scoring 80 or more points, and that's only happened against Florida A&M, George Washington, and USC Upstate. Only three previous times before Saturday have they won doing that. What did they show you in that win against Florida in terms of being able to maybe diversify style a little bit and be able to maybe be more of a chameleon in that type of environment?
Yeah, they showed me they're a very good second-half basketball team. Just every week it seems like they're, it depends on the game, obviously, but I feel like they've definitely had some slower starts in some games, and then they turn it on the second half, and Saturday was really just no exception. I mean, 51 points in the second half. I'm told that was the highest, I can't remember the exact stat, but it's like the highest second half scoring they've done all season, which is incredible. 51 points in the second half to Florida's 39. And, yeah, you're right, 82 points. I mean, this is a team that doesn't score that much that often. Like you said, I think, thinking off the top of my head, Tennessee, for instance, when they went down to up to Knoxville, won that game. They won 63-59, I believe. So, obviously, this is a very defensive first team, but they do have some shooters that can go out there and score. And when a guy like Michi Johnson, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a sec, goes out and does what he does, the volume in which they score goes up exponentially.
You mentioned Michi. That's exactly where I was taking this bad boy next, because Michi has been named not just the SEC Player of the Week, he is the National Player of the Week in all of college basketball, following that 25-point outburst against Florida, and then also going back to the road game at Texas A&M, where he finally got out of this little shooting slump for a little bit, and now we're starting to really see the Michi that we saw in November and December, and we're seeing him kind of break out onto the scene with his electric three-point shooting at the right time.
Yeah, it feels like it's about the right time for him to get out of his little rut that he was in. And like you said, it goes back to that Texas A&M game where he has, the 20-plus points, and then at the end of the game, it's not his scoring that really stood out, in my opinion at least. It was the awesome pass he made to Zach Davis after Texas A&M scored to tie the game with like 10 seconds left, and then Lamont Paris doesn't call a timeout, and you got to give him credit where it's due. He trusts his guys out there and just score. And you see Michi driving down the left side, blowing past the defender, and then he's got a big man in his face. And what does he do? He kicks out to Zach Davis. I shouldn't kick out, but he dumps it off to Zach Davis right in the middle of the paint for an easy, wide-open layup to what would ultimately win the game. And it's stuff like that that stands out. He's able to go out there and make other plays besides being a perennial shooter and stuff. He can rebound. He can assist. He can play pretty good defense. So that's really where I feel like his game has really grown this year. Now, in terms of scoring, I mean, we know at some point he was going to be due for a week like he just had. And Saturday, I think, was the culmination of that. Obviously, 4 points in the first half, nothing really to ride home about. But then in the second half, he scores 21 points on 9 of 10 shooting and just completely turns the game around. I mean, you could say South Carolina won that game because of their 1-3-1 defense and the ability to make Florida turn the ball over like they did. But I think there's no way they win that game without Michi Johnson doing what he did and scoring at such a high volume.
Yeah, it was one of the Michi bail us out games that they had a lot in the beginning part of the year. Look at the East Carolina game. Offense got stagnant, and it was a, hey, Michi bail us out kind of game. You go to the game at Clemson where you lost, but you got a lot of production at the end of the game where it was, hey, Michi bail us out, get us a big bucket type deal, and you kind of saw it against Florida, and it's good to see that if you really need a basket like that late, you can rely on him to be efficient and make the right play with the basketball, like what you mentioned with Zach Davis getting what might be the easiest game-winning layup in the history of South Carolina basketball. But going back to the 1-3-1, because you mentioned that as being another turning point of the game, Lamont deploys it with about 11 minutes to go in the game. They're down 6 points. Florida is carving them up on zoom actions and ball screens. When you saw South Carolina go in that 1-3-1 with Zach Davis at the top, causing havoc, what about that defensive lineup really gave Florida trouble in your eyes?
So I know, and a lot of you probably know this as well, but they did it earlier this year. I can't remember who, but it was against someone big in a game they were kind of down, and it completely changed the. I think it was the Georgia game.
The one on the road. Yeah.
Yes, the one on the road where Georgia's just hitting every single shot to start the game, and then the rest of the game, it's like South Carolina goes into that 1-3-1 defense, and it's like Georgia can't hit the side of a barn. And it wasn't like that on Saturday because Florida, 39 points in the second half and 76 points overall is normally pretty good to get you a win. But, that defense, man, there were times where it was just like Florida would have to hit some crazy shots to stay in that game. And, I think that's when it's a good sign is when Florida's taking these really tight, tough shots after making some, kind of silly plays. And there were times where Florida just kind of played, I don't want to say careless with the ball, but South Carolina was all over them, and they were, suffocated at times. And that's what that 1-3-1 can definitely do. And, with a guy like Zach Davis at the top, I think him being in the starting lineup, honestly, it really has progressed this team's game just overall. Offensively with Miles Studi being the starter for most of the year, you get more points out of that guy and stuff, and a really good veteran type of player. But with Davis, I think he just brings a sense of youthful energy, but also good skills on both sides of the ball. Now, if his three-point shooting was a little more on point, we'd be talking about him being like one of the best players in the SEC. But that's neither here nor there. I think that'll come in time. But, overall, I think the 1-3-1 has been it's crazy that Lamont just pulled it out of what feels like left field and just he makes that switch in game, and it pays dividends.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the mentioning of Zach Davis, getting in the starting lineup and what that's done for the team, because it made them different, and it made them really good in a different way. Obviously Miles brings the three-point shooting element, and Zach brings that on-ball defense and cutting ability. And while they're different, they don't have a drop-off. That's a big plus for this team. Real quick, Jack, got about 30 seconds or so for you. The baseball team drops 2 against Clemson, strands 22 runners, but you had 2 really exciting games against the number 10 team in the country. What were your observations from the 2 games against Clemson this weekend?
Yeah, in a short little brief summary, I would say they got to hit better with runners in scoring position and runners on base. Way too many instances where you have a guy at third or second in scoring position and you can't bring him home. That was something they were actually doing an okay job of before this weekend. But, I mean, when you lose one-run games, that's the first thing you look at. I thought the pitching was pretty good. Obviously, you'd like to get some more length out of your starters, but I think guys like Garrett Gainey and Ty Good and even Roman Kimball, despite giving up 2 homers and stuff, and Matthew Becker, I thought the pitching was really solid. Again, it comes down to that situational hitting, and you can get that figured out. I think this offense will be really good once SEC play starts and stuff. This offense is way too good to be in such a rut right now. But again, I think it'll all come in time, and if the pitching holds up the way it is right now, I think they're in a really good position moving forward.
I certainly agree. Jack Velcher from Gamecock Central joining me here for this segment. Jack, appreciate you joining me for a little bit, and excited to be able to be in the house with you on March 6th whenever the Gamecocks take on Tennessee.
Oh, baby. I'm excited for it, man. Thank you again for having me. Always appreciate it, buddy.
You're the man. Jack Velcher, Gamecock Central. We got more coming up next on the Postgame Show.
Final seconds ticking off here at a sold-out Colonial Life Arena. Spear tied up, ball knocked free, stolen away by Fulwiley, and that'll end it. For the second straight year, the Gamecocks have gone undefeated during the regular season and undefeated in SEC play. They knock off Tennessee here for the second time this season, 76-68.
That's from yesterday. Our man Brad Muller on the call as Dawn Staley and her South Carolina Gamecocks clinched another undefeated regular season, doing something that, is in the likes of early 2000s, 2010s UConn in terms of just running through your regular season slate unbeaten, doing things that only the blue bloods of the sport have done. And now I think they've kind of planted themselves as the premier new blood of women's college basketball. And Dawn Staley has done an incredible job with this team, having the starting five completely revamped from last season. They win their first 29 games this year. They're going to be the number 1 seed in the SEC tournament, where they will play the winner of Texas A&M and Mississippi State. We'll have more from the bracket as it's been released after the final day of the regular season yesterday and the drive around the SEC. But I wanted to talk about this team a little bit because we're talking about two completely different teams from last year to this year in terms of your starting five and your main contributors. Your leadership's different. Gone are Aaliyah Boston and Bree Beal, and a lot of the players that you relied upon to give that senior leadership, the freshies, all of them, a group of players that were the core of this team for the entirety of their college careers. Some of them had to wait their way to be starting contributors, but in doing so, laid a foundation of a championship-type culture where you can wait your way to where you're going to be able to get your time. It will come, and you're able to contribute in a big way. Bree Hall is the perfect example of that. Ashlyn Watkins right now, the perfect example of that. Chloe Kitts, a fantastic example of that, of players who did not get a lot of run last year. They are thrown into a position to where they either have to start or contribute big minutes, contribute big rebounds, big scoring outputs, great defensive possessions, and they've all come through because they're ready. And a lot of that comes from the foundation laid by the group of the freshies of the last few years. And despite losing all of that, you have new leadership that has resulted in another undefeated regular season. You have two freshmen who have come in with Tessa Johnson and Mylasia Fulwiley, who have been key contributors. You have a transfer from Oregon in Tahina Paopao, who is the best three-point shooter in all women's college basketball. It has made night and day difference in terms of shooting output. But that means the leadership's different. That means the locker room vibes are a little different. So after the game, Peyton Titus from the state did ask Dawn Staley about the vibes of this locker room, maybe the differences between last year and this year, because the leadership is so dramatically different. And, I think the answer that Dawn gave might surprise you a little bit.
So I would probably equate it to a doctorate program. And they're going to get me for saying this. And daycare. Like, our locker room sounds like daycare. Like, it's so much talking. Like, it's so much talking about nothing that, and we, in the beginning of the season, we would just say, be quiet, like, and now it's just who they are. It really is just who they are, and it's it's their identity, and we really don't fight that battle. We just put our earplugs in and keep it moving. Alan?
Just put the earplugs in and keep it moving. And equating it to a daycare is not only funny, but comparing it to a daycare and contrasting it with last year being more of a doctorate program is the perfect example of there is more than one way to bake a cake. There's more than one way to create a dominant college basketball program, where last year maybe the vibes in the locker room are more serious. You have that veteran leadership where you're on a mission, and not saying that this team's not, but taking what Dawn said and saying, where it maybe was a little quieter in the locker room this year and equating it to now where they will not stop talking. And to quote Dawn, about nothing. And that's hilarious. This team's dynamic is just different than it was last year, and the results are similar. They're winning a lot of games. These two teams are from last year to this year are incredibly different in style of play, in personnel in terms of who are getting the major minutes, and then also their attitudes in the locker room. This is a perfect example of maybe a little psychology lesson of, you can approach your craft a little differently and still get incredible results. Clearly, this team right now approaches the locker room, approaches their daily work different than last year's teams. But guess what? They're still 29-0. They're having all the fun in the world doing it. And maybe that's why a team that is completely brand new and is carrying on the legacy of the best new blood program in the sport, maybe doesn't feel as much pressure as you think they might after finishing a regular season 29-0. 5 o'clock news, drive around the SEC coming up next in the final hour of the postgame show. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways, and we have plenty of them. We'll start off in Irmo. An accident at Bickley Road at Broad River Road is still causing some traffic backup. Clemson Road at I-20, that accident has recently been reported to be causing some traffic delay. One from last hour, Highway 1 at Augusta Road at Sparkleberry Lane is still causing some small traffic backup, as well as one in Lexington on I-20 westbound over the I-26 exit 64. We have an accident in Purcellville Road at Highway 12 at I-77, one at Pisgah Church Road at US 1, and one on Shop Road at I-77. That's right. Breaking news is indeed breaking out everywhere. And today is a day that I know our friend Jay Phillips probably would like to be on the show to maybe vent or share his thoughts on one of our breaking news stories that has actually kind of come across the timeline here in the last hour. And it does involve Jay's beloved Denver Broncos. No, they are not bringing back John Elway to play quarterback. They're actually making a different change at quarterback. According to Ian Rappaport at Rap Sheet on Twitter, quote, sources, the Broncos are moving on from quarterback Russell Wilson, closing a tough chapter for the team and allowing coach Sean Payton and Wilson to start fresh. Wilson is available for a team needing a starter. Denver avoids an extra $37 million fully guaranteed now. So Russell Wilson has officially been cut by the Denver Broncos. The Russell Wilson era is officially over in Denver for someone who had a decorated career in Seattle and made his acquisition to Denver made news as one of the biggest blockbuster trades in the NFL over the last few years. It turns out to be one of the biggest flops of a trade over the last few years. Seattle did a good job of acquiring some decent players and using the draft picks from that trade to help rebuild themselves into a team who's in playoff contention the last few years. And Geno Smith, who was playing behind Russell Wilson, has turned himself into a above average good starter in the NFL. I don't want to go as far as saying really good, but above average and good. He's been good. The Seahawks have been good. They have been better than Denver. And Denver gave up a whole lot on that farm to be able to acquire one Russell Wilson. And just after 2 short years and 2 different head coaches, Russell Wilson is now back on the market for a team needing a starting quarterback. And I can't imagine that the market for Russell Wilson is going to be booming. Nowhere near like what it was a few years ago. And even that's dwindled a little bit because of his time in the NFL, his age. Not a lot of teams are going to want to maybe take that risk right now. But we'll see. Russell Wilson is now out of Denver after 2 years, and now Sean Payton in Denver will be one of the many teams that, whether it be in the NFL draft or in free agency, are going to be on the lookout for a new signal caller. So a new era in Denver will begin. That starts off that happening here in the last hour or so. So that kicks off our 5 o'clock news and a lot of stuff from yesterday. We'll go ahead and start with some sad news out of the NFL world. And that is the announcing by ESPN that longtime NFL reporter Chris Mortensen passed away at age 72. Chris Mortensen is a beloved journalist and football reporter. I can remember many meals, many breakfasts sitting in front of my TV at my dad's house growing up, watching Chris Mortensen on Sunday mornings talk about who's in and who's out for the upcoming NFL games that day. I still vividly remember him breaking the news of Peyton Manning's trade to Denver. Speaking of the Broncos, I still vividly remember his breaking news of announcing that Peyton Manning was going to retire from the National Football League. Him and Peyton had a really good relationship. Chris Mortensen had a really good relationship with a lot of people in the NFL. He was very well sourced. He was Adam Schefter before Adam Schefter was Adam Schefter. He's a guy that teams trusted with information. He is a guy that is a consummate professional, and that word that gets tossed around a lot, but Chris Mortensen was that. And I'm lucky enough to have been able to work with him, even in a small capacity, in terms of booking shows. Back when I was in Nashville at an ESPN radio affiliate, Chris Mortensen came on our show plenty of times, and it was always available by text message. Sometimes booking guests from large media conglomerates has to go through, requires going through certain, media relations people, which is fine, totally understandable. But Chris Mortensen was always available by text, and he was always eager to join a show. He'd work with you to come on the show because that man, almost more than anything, loved talking football. And even in the brief time that I got to experience with Chris Mortensen, he was a real treat to get to be around and get to talk to. And one of the best in this business in terms of reporting, whether it be breaking news or giving you insight into your favorite NFL teams and NFL players. Chris Mortensen was that guy to help break it down for you. Passed away yesterday at 72. He was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer back in 2016. And thoughts to his family, and the world of football lost one of its best in terms of reporters and people and relationship builders. So Chris Mortensen will definitely be missed. On the hardwood yesterday, Caitlin Clark made a little bit of history yesterday as Iowa took on Ohio State.
Going up in Cedar Rapids. Now Caitlin at the line. For the record. She ties it with that one. This for college basketball history. She does it with a foul shot. Caitlin Clark becomes the all-time leading scorer in major college basketball history.
That's right. History was made yesterday on the hardwood, and Caitlin Clark with those 2 free throws on a technical with less than a second left. Now, that might have been a little questionable for those who didn't see. Obviously, you heard right there Gus Johnson, who's also one of the best, calling Caitlin Clark's historical moment. She got to the free throw line with no one around her because an Ohio State player was assessed a technical foul for walking into her during a stoppage in play. There was less than a second remaining in the half. An Ohio State player walked into Caitlin Clark and was assessed a technical foul, I would say rather questionably, to editorialize a little bit. I don't think I would have called a T there. I think I would have let that one go if I was an official, especially considering, those points could have made a huge difference in the game. Those points could have made ultimately, those 2 points did a little bit. 93-85 win over Ohio State. And if you look at Caitlin Clark, she does surpass Pete Maravich for the all-time NCAA scoring title. Now, this has been heavily discussed, up for debate the last few weeks about, maybe the legitimacy of it because, yes, she is the NCAA's all-time leading scorer. She is not college basketball's all-time leading scorer yet, because obviously she still has Frances Marion legend Pearl Moore to surpass, but that's all she's got, because last week against Minnesota, she did pass Lynette Woodard at Kansas for the AIAW record for large schools, the major school record for career points. She did surpass Lynette in that one, and Pearl Moore's record is the small school AIAW record for career points. And for those who are unaware, the NCAA did not recognize women's basketball, I'll say, until at least the 90s. So women's basketball was not an NCAA sport at the time. So the NCAA record of Pistol Pete does not take into account Kansas's Lynette Woodard and Frances Marion's Pearl Moore. But while Clark has passed Woodard and Pistol Pete yesterday, she is now 199 points away from tying the record set by Pearl Moore. She is 200 points away from breaking it. Now, they have the Big Ten tournament next week. I think if we assume that they play 2 games in the Big Ten tournament, and let's say they get to the Final Four. So say I was able to play 6 more games. Caitlin Clark will have to average 33.3 points per game in those games in order to pass Pearl Moore as the highest scoring college basketball player at any level men or women, NCAA or AIAW, in the history of basketball. A lofty goal, but still passing Pete Maravich is an incredible accomplishment because you know what? There are not a lot of players scoring 3,667 points in their collegiate career. Caitlin Clark did it in the last 4 years, and she is electing not to use her COVID year to play for a 5th year in which she would absolutely then break that record. But she will be declaring for the WNBA draft after the season and is the likely number 1 pick to the Indiana Fever. So Caitlin Clark with a little bit of history yesterday as Iowa took down Ohio State and avenged that loss that they had earlier at Ohio State, which, as we remember, caused a little bit of court storming controversy, which is probably, I guess, one of the controversies and discussion points in college basketball that I am ready to put to bed. I'm over the whole court storming discussion. Not a huge fan of it. I love court storming, but the discourse has gotten a little tiring. But Caitlin Clark, all-time leading scorer. And lastly, we'll go ahead. Mike Evans, this broke this morning. Mike Evans, wide receiver for the Buccaneers. Bad news for my fellow Saints fans. Bad news for your Carolina Panther fans out there. And bad news for my friend Tyler Head and all the fellow Atlanta Falcons fans who already live in a little bit of misery, that Mike Evans has re-signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 2-year, $52 million deal. $35 million of that is guaranteed. So Mike Evans more than likely going to retire a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and I guess his next stop after Tampa would be to Canton. And you know, when you look at his career as a whole, it makes a lot of sense that he's going to be a Hall of Fame player. I know Jason Kelsey retired today too. Another piece of news that Tyler and I talked about in the halftime show, in the last hour of the halftime show, talked about Jason Kelsey being a Hall of Famer. And speaking of Hall of Famers, you know, Mike Evans, I think, is going to be one of those guys too. Last season, he was tied for a league lead with 13 receiving touchdowns, and this was in his 10th season. He is I would call it a sneaky Hall of Fame career, because when you think about the best receivers in the NFL over the last 5 or 6 years, you know, you think of the Devontae Adamses, the Justin Jeffersons. You throw a lot of names out of guys who have put up some ridiculous numbers. Cooper Kupp had a record-breaking season just a few years ago. Michael Thomas had a record-breaking season just a few years before that in terms of, you know, receiving touchdowns and putting up just cartoonish numbers, touchdowns and receptions. There are a lot of guys that you would have considered top 3 or 4 receivers in the league for a while, and Mike Evans doesn't get mentioned maybe as much as he should. But not many other players have 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons. 10 straight with over a K in a season, in those seasons, and even in this late in his career, having 13 receiving touchdowns and being tied for the league lead. Oh, yeah, and he won a Super Bowl. Yeah, Tom Brady's the best to ever do it, but you know what? It definitely helped to have Mike Evans to throw to. And if you look at the pantheon of the best receivers Tom Brady's ever had, Randy Moss is the clear number 1. And I think there's a really good case you could make for maybe outside, below Gronk as a pass catcher. You could put Mike Evans, and I think there's a legitimate discussion to have with Mike Evans being as effective a pass catcher as Rob Gronkowski in certain situations. And you can definitely point to that Super Bowl and that offense, the way they were clicking the last few years of Brady's career, attributing that to a lot to the loaded roster, especially with Mike Evans on the outside. Tampa Bay has locked him in. He will probably finish his career there in Tampa again. 2 years, $52 million, $35 million of that is guaranteed. So bad news for my fellow NFC South team supporters. Godspeed, and we'll see if the Buccaneers can use Mike Evans to repeat their division title next year. A lot of good stuff on the hardwood this past weekend. A baseball sweep that isn't sitting well with Gamecock fans. We'll continue our discussion of the wild Gamecock athletics weekend as the postgame show continues. Go to 1075thegame.com and register for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Now, for those who remember, this is kind of like the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest. Every game here is $25 added to the pot. So if a Gamecocks hitter rips a Grand Slam home run, you can win cash from Palmetto Citizens FCU. The pot is currently at $275. And who knows, if they hit with runners on scoring position like they did this weekend, we are going to see that number rise greatly. I kid. But also, they did strand 22 runners, so they had ample opportunity, especially against Gardner-Webb. They had ample opportunity to be able to win some lucky person who entered the contest $275. Now, again, you must enter and do so by going to 1075thegame.com and register for this contest, and you can win a chance to win a good chunk of cash if the Gamecocks are able to knock out a Grand Slam home run. I made the joke earlier about, stranding runners, and, maybe we do get to a pretty hefty number like we did with the Special Teams Touchdown Contest with no one winning anything until the Gamecocks finally scored a Special Teams touchdown at the Vanderbilt game in the middle of November. I actually don't think it's going to get that long. I don't think it's going to be as bad as I joked and made it out to be. This team hits really well. I think they're going to turn it around. And I think Mark Kingston and his staff at least have kind of identified a few things that they struggled with a little bit in terms of hitting with runners in scoring position, maybe players thinking about it too much, overthinking, and maybe trying to do too much, and maybe getting a little what he called pull happy and trying to get the ball to the side of the field they're hitting and maybe not taking what's given to them. Used Ethan Petrie as an example. Ethan used what was given to him on a pitch and sent it to the opposite field for a home run and was able to knock in the 2 runs needed to take it to extra innings, and that's where the game ended up finalizing. Before I get into anything else, I want to go ahead and call myself out on an error here, and a pretty brutal one. I've been pumping, the game app, but you can hear us from anywhere. That's one good way to listen to us outside of your terrestrial radio, FM radio. We also have the Game TV, where we video stream all of our shows. And I have been going the entire show with the screen as a black screen. I forgot to press a button leaving the main studio to come in here behind the soundboard in the production room, and forgot to press a button. So I've been pressing fade to black for the commercials when the screen was already black. So for those who've been watching the Game TV, thankfully there have been people who have stuck with us on that, who have been listening to the show. You can now watch it again because I, dummy of the day, finally went into the other studio and pressed the cut button to get the video feed that's going into my studio to be able to feed it to YouTube. So some fun inside baseball there about me being an idiot and making our YouTube page or YouTube video that's streaming right now just a black screen. So that has been rectified, and you can watch the show for the last, 40 minutes of it now that I've kind of fixed my mistakes. So you know what? Baseball players make errors, and so do radio hosts, especially me. That was not one of my finest moments right there, but we're back. We're back. All is good. All is good. We can still hear it, but now we can watch it as well. And again, while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page and be able to watch all of our shows as they start each and every day. So a lot of fun that we have here on the game. And now we've learned today that it works best when the cameras are on and you're not staring at a black screen with my voice coming out of it. So fun stuff there. The Game TV on our YouTube page. Talked a little baseball. The Colonial Life Arena this weekend was the place to be, man. The atmosphere in both of these games, whether it be the men winning against Florida in epic fashion, scoring 82 points to do so, or the women clawing one out against a desperate Tennessee team 76-68, that there was a lot going on. And also clinching their undefeated record, mind you. We didn't get to cover as much of the women's game, but they're going into the SEC tournament undefeated for the second straight year. And I feel pretty good about their chances of making it through and going into the NCAA tournament undefeated. And the biggest cloud that's going to be covering this team from here until Selection Sunday is the pressure. Because human nature says you would feel a ton of pressure in that situation. Last year you were undefeated, and you made it all the way to the Final Four before playing the one team that could expose your fatal flaw, outside shooting. You had to get in a 3-point shooting match against Caitlin Clark. Ultimately, it didn't happen. Your season ended prematurely without a chance to play in the national title game against a team that you smacked around on Super Bowl Sunday just, a month and a half beforehand. Sometimes that pressure can get to you. I don't think it was pressure that beat the Gamecocks in the Final Four last year. I think it was just one team that did the one thing that can expose you, and they did the one thing or make you do one thing that you're not very good at. That's perimeter shooting. Iowa was really the only team that matched up with you that I felt could make them have to get in that type of game. There's not a lot of those teams this year. And I think if this South Carolina team, this rendition of the Lady Gamecocks play Iowa, that I think this game goes a little differently. I think South Carolina wins that game. But also, that's with me just taking it into account, just looking at two basketball teams and looking at matchups. That doesn't have me taking into account pressure, because human nature would say that you have all the pressure in the world riding on you in that game if these teams were to meet in the Final Four or the Elite Eight. I know that the selection committee gave out their bracket preview and they had Iowa in South Carolina's region, meaning the only time they would meet in the tournament, if that were the bracket, would be in the Elite Eight. The pressure in that game would be mounting. The pressure in a Final Four rematch against Iowa would be even greater. And then if you had to do it, if you get to the national championship, regardless of who you play, if you're undefeated, that is enormous amounts of pressure to finish a perfect regular season, winning an SEC regular season title, winning an SEC tournament title, and then winning a national title. Those are a lot of goals, and you got to be perfect to achieve a lot of them if you want to be undefeated national champions. And Te-Hina Paopao, I thought, gave a pretty interesting answer yesterday when asked about the pressure that's coming with an undefeated regular season, in knowing that that's going to be part of this team's storyline as we move through the SEC bracket in Greenville and the NCAA tournament after that.
It's not really pressure. I think we just go out there and play. We generally love playing with each other, so it's just no pressure. We just go out there, play our game, and knowing that who we are, we're going to get the dub at the end of the day. So it's just no pressure at all. We just love to play with each other and want to go out there and win, no matter how we get it.
And I think that tracks. That tracks really well based off what Dawn Staley mentioned earlier. And you know what? I'm going to play the cut one more time because it's the funniest cut we have here on the list. It was the funniest press conference moment. One of my favorite ones this season, being able to attend these. And, Peyton Titus from the State asked Coach Dawn Staley about the vibe in the locker room this season and maybe compared it and contrasted it from last season.
So I would probably equate it to a doctorate program. And they're going to get me for saying this. And daycare. Like, our locker room sounds like daycare. Like, it's so much talking. Like, it's so much talking about nothing that, and we, in the beginning of the season, we would just say, be quiet, like, and now it's just who they are. It really is just who they are, and it's it's their identity, and we really don't fight that battle. We just put our earplugs in and keep it moving. Alan?
They're loose. The vibes in that locker room are loose, and it's for the better. Te-Hina said that she doesn't feel the pressure. They love playing with each other on the floor, and any chance they get to play as a unit, they feel like they're confident they're going to be able to win any game they play, and that comes pressure-free. Now, I don't think it's going to be pressure-free here in these next few games when you get into single elimination settings, but I think the large sample size of 29 games you have before that's got to make you feel good about their chances of going through these single elimination settings. You potentially have 9 games left, and in order to accomplish all the goals that you laid out in front of you, you got to win all 9 of them. That's a lot of pressure. Human nature says you're going to feel a lot of pressure. But Dawn Staley says this team is a little different than last year's team. They have a lot of fun. They do a lot of talking, and if you ask Dawn Staley, maybe too much talking, but they are very gelled. They are very into being able to be on this team with each other. They have figured out what makes each other tick, and there is a team chemistry right now that after just 1 year as a starting unit, 1 year as a brand new team from last year, maybe they don't feel that same type of pressure that I alluded to earlier. or maybe they feel it a little bit, and maybe it's just not the same as what they had to feel last season. Drive Around the SEC coming up next, right here on the Postgame Show. From the WIS Traffic Center, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways here this Monday afternoon. We'll go ahead and start off with a road that's closed due to road construction. This is going to be closed until Thursday. That's going to be Clemson Road eastbound near Hardscrabble Road. Again, closed due to construction. Clemson Road eastbound near Hardscrabble Road is closed completely. An accident has been reported in Richland County, Clemson Road at I-20. Some more Clemson Road issues. In Lexington County, an accident's been reported at I-20 westbound over at I-26 near exit 64. And lastly, we have one here in Columbia, an accident recently been reported at Shop Road over at I-77. That's right. It's time to take a drive around the SEC here this afternoon. Elijah Campbell here with you. No Jay Phillips today. Taking you all the way up until 6 o'clock. And a lot to get into. There's a busy weekend in the SEC. And mostly with, on the hardwood. The men, there was a game, an epic blockbuster game between Tennessee and Alabama. We'll get into that because that game determined who is sitting in first place going into the final week of the regular season. But the women's basketball group in the SEC has concluded their regular season. Obviously, South Carolina ended their regular season with a 76-68 win over Tennessee. They already had their first place spot locked up, their first seed locked up in the tournament. It's going to be in Greenville starting on Wednesday. But now all the seeding is set, and it looks like South Carolina will get the 1 seed. LSU finishes in second with the 2. Ole Miss was able to finish in third, so they get the double bye, as well as a result of Tennessee losing yesterday to South Carolina. Alabama will have the 4 seeds, so your top 4 teams that get the double bye in the SEC tournament will be South Carolina, LSU, Ole Miss, and Alabama, all seeded in that order. On Wednesday, Game 1 will be at 11 a.m. Georgia is going to take on Kentucky, 13-seeded Georgia against 12-seeded Kentucky, 2 teams that have struggled drastically this season, and the winner of that game will face Tennessee, the 5 seed. And then Wednesday, Florida will take on Missouri. That's going to be in Game 2. That'll also be early, about 25 minutes after Game 1. So we're looking at about a 1:30, 2 o'clock tip-off for that one. The winner of Missouri and Florida will take on 6-seeded Vanderbilt. 7-seeded Auburn will have their game on Thursday, March 7th against Arkansas. The winner of that Auburn-Arkansas game will take on LSU. And then also Tennessee will have the winner of Georgia-Kentucky. The winner of that game takes on Alabama. And then the winner of Florida-Missouri's got Vanderbilt. The winner of that game will then take on Ole Miss. And South Carolina will be patiently awaiting for the winner of 8-seed Mississippi State versus 9-seeded Texas A&M. That game will be on Thursday, March 7th at noon. So Thursday. If you want to go do a little scouting ahead of time, go to the SEC Network and catch Mississippi State against Texas A&M, because that is who South Carolina will have in the quarterfinal of the SEC. Or they to win that, they'll probably play Alabama or Tennessee in the semis. And then we potentially, on Sunday, March 10th at 3 p.m., might have a rematch of the epic regular season game between South Carolina and LSU. That one was at LSU. This one will be in Greenville. That's kind of where I'm thinking. If I'm filling out an SEC women's bracket right now, I feel really confident about having a reunion of that epic regular season matchup in Greenville between South Carolina and the LSU Tigers. That one would be a real fun game, and talk about the pressure on that one. Yes, I mean, ultimately, the SEC tournament isn't the main goal. A couple of years ago, you lost the SEC title game to a scrappy Kentucky team led by Ryan Howard, who could score from all over the floor. And you know what that wasn't? There's a lot of things that game was. It was the SEC championship game. It was for an automatic bid in the NCAA tournament, even though you were getting in anyway. But what it wasn't was the end of the world. You can still make it to the SEC championship game, and if you don't maybe go out on top against a team like LSU, then it's not the end of the world. And who knows, maybe that alleviates some of that pressure that I alluded to in the previous segment with your perfect regular season going into the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of examples in the last few years, whether it be in women's hoops or in men's hoops, of teams that have these epically long winning streaks going into the NCAA tournament and not making it to the championship game, or maybe losing in the championship game. It's really hard to maintain those winning streaks, but that's something to watch for in the SEC Women's Tournament. Again, that is tipping off Wednesday, March 6th, 11 a.m. between Georgia and Kentucky. That will get the festivities started, and it will wrap up on Sunday, March 10th, with the championship game at 3 o'clock. And on the men's side, I alluded to the blockbuster game of the week in the SEC. Alabama and Tennessee played for first place in the SEC. Tennessee beats Alabama 81-74 on the road in a game that feels odd. It feels odd because if you told me going into that game that Tennessee was going to beat Alabama, I would say, wow, Dalton Connect might have had 40. Or Tennessee might have won, 105-103. Or that they're definitely hitting the over. The winning team has to score more than 90 points. That's how Alabama plays. And Tennessee can score with a lot of people because they have one of the best one-on-one scorers in college basketball. But that wasn't the case. And Tennessee, a team who doesn't go overboard on three-point attempts, shot 43s. Alabama shot 37. That's normal for Alabama. They do shoot a ton of threes, and they shot a lot more threes than they did twos, and that's not foreign to Nate Oates' offense. But a Rick Barnes offense going on the road and shooting 43s and shooting a higher percentage and making a higher percentage of those threes at Alabama's home floor, so playing Alabama's game and just doing it better, was something that I would not have foreseen. I also wouldn't have foreseen Dalton Knecht scoring only 13 points on 14 shots. He was 5 of 14 from the field and was only 2 of 4 from the free throw line. Dalton Knecht was held in check by Alabama, by an Alabama defense that has been suspect. Because I know we like to talk about Kentucky's suspect defense, and trust me, I'm going to get to that here in a little bit too. But Alabama's defense, despite having the number one efficient offense in college basketball, almost ranks outside the top 100 in defensive efficiency. And it showed. But they still played relatively well, held Dalton Knecht in check, and didn't matter. Zakai Ziegler had 18 points on the afternoon and 4 assists, but Josiah Jordan-James was really the hero for Tennessee. He scored 11 points, hit 3 of his 6 three-point attempts, and grabbed 13 rebounds, 11 defensive rebounds, but 13 rebounds in total, had 3 assists, no turnovers, and a steal to go with that. He played really well, and that was really one of the biggest reasons why Tennessee was able to go into Coleman Coliseum and steal one from Alabama, an Alabama team who has an SEC Player of the Year frontrunner in Mark Sears, who did score 22 points, but was only 2 of 8 from his three-point attempts and did turn the ball over 4 times. So Tennessee is in sole possession of first place in the SEC, going into their massive tilt against the Gamecocks here at Colonial Life Arena. Going to be a nationally televised game, ESPN2, I believe. So that's going to be one to watch, because if South Carolina wins, they will have sole possession of first place going into the final game of the regular season. Speaking of Kentucky, Kentucky's on the outside looking in of the top 4 in the SEC. They played Arkansas on CBS, and I mentioned, how Kentucky doesn't really play great defense. Well, they also don't play defense in general. Arkansas comes into the game as the 110th most efficient offense in college basketball and scores 102 points at Rupp Arena. Yes, the 14-15 Arkansas Razorbacks went into Rupp and scored 102 points. Now, granted, Kentucky scored 111, and they've continued the cartoonish three-point shooting that they've been doing all year long. They're the number 1 three-point shooting team in the country and made 45% of their triples against Arkansas. Made over 62% of their twos, were insanely efficient. It was almost at 1.3 points per possession, which, if you sustained that for an entire season, would be an all-time record. Oh, and also helps that, some people call it the Rupperies. Some people call it an aggressive driving offense by Kentucky, but they did shoot 42 free throws in that game. And look, they made 34 of them, to their credit. A fun stat from this game for Kentucky as well. Kentucky played 5 players off the bench. 10 players appeared in this game in a Kentucky Wildcats uniform. Every single player that played in the game attempted at least 2 free throws. Every single one of them. Aaron Bradshaw had the most with 8, but every single player that suited up and played in this game shot at least a pair of free throws as Kentucky wins 111-102 against Arkansas. We'll take a quick look at the standings now after some of the big games from the weekend. Tennessee, of course, in first. Alabama and South Carolina tied for second, even though for seeding the SEC tournament today, Alabama would have the 2 seed because of that tiebreaker that they hold over the Gamecocks. Auburn is a game out, and so is Kentucky, a game behind South Carolina. So I guess Kentucky, I said they were on the outside looking in. They'd actually be on the inside because they do hold that tiebreaker over Auburn. So I guess they would be sitting at 4th right now, Auburn at 5th, and then Florida a game behind them at 10-6 as a result of the loss that they suffered here at the hands of the Gamecocks at CLA. So all of this leading to the mega matchup on Wednesday night. We're going to be talking about that a lot this week, and we're going to break into that game a whole lot more tomorrow because we will not have a show on Wednesday because of Gamecock baseball leading up to that game. So tomorrow we're going to dive deep, hot and heavy into this Gamecock-Vols matchup that has first place in the SEC on the line going into the final weekend of the season. So a lot of that tomorrow. We'll conclude with some calls and conclude with some final thoughts as the post-game show concludes in the next segment. Final segment of the post-game show. Don't forget that tomorrow, Carolina Calls with Coach Lamont Paris and our man Derek Scott will be at 6 p.m. right after I wrap up here on the postgame show. And then on WISW, our sister station, 6:15 pregame, 6:30 first pitch for the Gamecocks, who are back on the diamond, this time playing a different in-state foe. They'll take on the Citadel. And then Wednesday, Gamecock baseball can be heard here against Davidson, 2:45 pregame, 3 o'clock first pitch, so no postgame show. That will also lead up into the play-by-play broadcast for the mega basketball game on Wednesday night between Tennessee and South Carolina. With all that being said, still a lot to talk about today. We had Jack Veltri on to talk about the big Gators win, or the win against the Gators at CLA. And I know my man Justin has been waiting patiently on our Love Chevy phone lines, 803-404-6100. Justin, thanks for calling in, brother. What do you got for me?
How you doing, Elijah?
Oh, I'm fantastic.
Hey, Elijah, I feel good outside, man. I went to a game, and I glad we beat Florida. We haven't beat Florida in a long time, you know?
Mm-hmm. So you're at the game. Electric atmosphere, wasn't it? That was a whole lot of fun. I was in the building myself, and I don't know if I could add more fun at that game. That was a true home court advantage that the Gamecocks had on Saturday.
Oh, yeah. And I think about this, Elijah. We beat Texas and Ole Miss. Those two was on the bubble, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they probably played themselves off the bubble. I know Ole Miss is on the outside looking in, and Texas A&M absolutely is on the outside looking in because of their collection of some pretty poor losses from earlier in the year at Vanderbilt. But South Carolina didn't help those two teams' cause any, and I guess you can consider last week the Gamecocks were kind of bubble busters.
Oh, yeah, and we got Tennessee and Mississippi State. Now, those two are going to be in the in-state tournament. We know that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and Tennessee might be a 1 seed for the first time in program history. I know some bracketologists have them lined up as the 1 seed. So that's going to be a tough game. And rounding your home game against a potential number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament is a pretty big deal with the conference title almost on the line. And then having to wrap up your season at Mississippi State is going to be no gimme either.
I know, and tomorrow, I know South Carolina team going to be watching Florida. I bet if you're on South Carolina team, you're going to work for Florida, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, because here's the thing, Justin, and thank you for your call. I appreciate it. Always good talking to you, buddy. You're going to want Florida to win. If you are a South Carolina fan, they're playing Alabama at home, like Justin said, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, because Florida, in terms of net ranking, is really close. I mean, they are flirting with giving you a quad 1 win. Now, quad 1 wins are against teams, when you play them at home, they have to be ranked between 1 and 30. And if you look at Florida's at 33. Florida's at 33. Mississippi State is at 32. So if Mississippi State and Florida were able to leapfrog one of, Wake Forest, Colorado, Indiana State, New Mexico, or Texas here in the next few days, and Texas is playing Baylor tonight. And you know what? My EBPI has Baylor with a 71% chance to beat Texas. I think Baylor is really clicking offensively, and they got a little momentum after that win against Kansas. And Baylor is one of the more dangerous offenses in all of college basketball. So that's not out of the realm of possibility that one of Wake Forest, Colorado, Indiana State, well, Indiana State's regular season's over with, so they're pretty locked into their net ranking. But New Mexico and Texas can lose, and if Florida upsets Alabama, and let's say Mississippi State in their lead up to your game wins at Texas A&M, both of them can hop into the top 30 in net, and then voila, that is 2 quad 1 wins without having to play extra games. And in terms of what that looks like for your resume going into Selection Sunday, that would put you, if those were to happen, at least 5 quad 1 wins, because as of right now, you're 3-3 in the first quad, 7-0 in the second. So having a 10-3 record in quads 1 and 2 is a pretty strong resume and a pretty strong case for South Carolina. As of today, now Joe Lenardi's online bracketology on the page isn't completely updated, but he did post on his Twitter that he has South Carolina currently as a 5 seed if the season were to end today. And Jerry Palm from CBS has South Carolina as a 5 seed against South Florida, where they'd be playing in Pittsburgh, in his latest bracketology. So the consensus right now between the two, I would say the most popular bracketologists or, NCAA tournament forecasters have the Gamecocks at a 5 seed, which, of course, is kind of the danger zone. The 12-over-5 upset is a dreaded one that has gotten a lot of teams in the past, and statistically speaking is the most common of upsets that are, seeds are separated by more than 3 or 4 spots. I don't really consider the 9/8 an upset, and I barely consider the 10/7 an upset. But one of the more common ones is always the 12/5, and South Florida is the AAC regular season champion, and they have a Coach of the Year candidate with Amir Abdur-Rahim, who has turned them around in his first year as the Bulls head coach. So in theory, that would be a fascinating matchup. But you have a chance to improve seeding. As I told Tyler in the last hour of the halftime show, South Carolina has a one-way ticket into the land of the locks. And once they hop off that train, they are in the dance. And from here on out, they can only improve their seeding. So if you're a Gamecock fan, root for Florida to beat Alabama, root for Mississippi State to beat Texas A&M, because that can put them into quad 1 win territory and improve seeding. I'll be with you again by myself tomorrow from 3 to 6. I'm Elijah Campbell. We'll see you tomorrow.